Before we get into today's episode, I want to share something that's helped transform my daily routine. I've started using Bob, the refillable bottle-free body wash designed specifically for men. If you're still using bottled shower gel, you're literally washing money down the drain. Let's face it, you always use more than you need, and half of it just slips through your hands before it touches your skin. Bob combines a reusable applicator with exfoliating bristles and the world's first refillable body wash bars, formulated to match a man's skin pH of 5.5. All this means you get a deep clean with zero wastage. It's better for your skin, better for your wallet, and better for the planet. For an exclusive 15% offer on your first order, head over to welcometobob.com and use the code meaningofmen15 at checkout. Welcome back to The Meaning of Men. I'm your host, Simeon Atkins, and today I'm joined by Kody Green, one of the most powerful voices speaking out about schizophrenia online today. Diagnosed at 21, Kody's story is one of profound struggle and remarkable transformation. He opens up about what it's really like to live with schizophrenia, from hallucinations and delusions to the crushing isolation and stigma that so often comes with it. We talk about the impact his diagnosis had on his identity as a man, his experience with addiction and incarceration, and the long road back to self-worth and stability. Let's get into it. Kody, what's the main message you hope people remember from our conversation today?
I think one of the things I always try to focus on whenever I'm talking about my mental health advocacy is making sure that people know they're not alone, because I felt super alone in my journey when I was starting off with my diagnosis and with my mental health journey. So that's always what I want people to take away.
If I was meeting you for the first time, how would you describe yourself in a few sentences and maybe give us a bit of a flavor of the journey that's led you to where you are today?
Sure. So my name's Kody. I am a schizophrenia advocate. I was diagnosed with schizophrenia at 21 years old. My mom also has schizoaffective disorder, so I was a caregiver for her before I ever showed any symptoms myself. I am a recovering addict, and I try to use my social media platforms to educate people about addiction, mental illness, schizophrenia, and a lot of other topics. And the main reason I do that is because when I was diagnosed, I didn't have anyone I could talk to. I lived in a small rural area where people didn't really address mental health. They didn't talk about things like that. So now I try to go out of my way to make sure that everyone feels like they're not alone. And I think that's the most important thing I do, because there's a lot of people out there who haven't gotten past the stigma that surrounds mental health.
Do you feel if you'd had someone like yourself growing up, that could have made all the difference? Someone that was out there and advocating and educating people, what impact that might have had on you growing up and obviously developing into who you are today?
Yeah, I think just having someone who understood what I was going through would be huge for me. I did eventually find that through peer support, but it took a long time. It wasn't something that I knew about. It wasn't something that I had access to really early on in my diagnosis. And so I didn't really think anyone would be able to identify with my journey or with what I had been through. And it wasn't until I found peer support groups that I started realizing that people, could understand not just what I experienced with my diagnosis, but, people also could understand what I had been through with my addiction and my incarceration. And that, for me, was a huge turning point, because I saw these people who had, the same issues as me, but they were living full, functional, happy lives. And I didn't even know that was possible with an illness like mine, so...
Schizophrenia is something that I've heard spoken about before, but I've never met anyone or know anyone that has it. And it's certainly not a condition that I know a lot about. And I want to make sure that everyone listening from the offset is really clear on it. So can you just talk us through in really simplistic terms, what schizophrenia actually is?
Yeah, absolutely. Schizophrenia is a mental illness that causes hallucinations, delusions, and paranoid thoughts. There's also negative and cognitive symptoms that come along with it. But the main thing that it's known for is causing delusions and hallucinations in people. So in my own experience, I have auditory and visual hallucinations. I was also very delusional and paranoid when my symptoms first began. Thanks to medication and treatment now, the only symptoms I occasionally struggle with are auditory and visual hallucinations. They're just breakthrough symptoms that I have, but it's so rare compared to what I was experiencing before I found access to care and treatment.
I'm just trying to think what that was like growing up, and what kind of age were you when you got diagnosed with this? And was there a period where you were having these symptoms and didn't really understand what the rhyme and reason was for it? Because I can imagine that was really scary.
Yeah, I didn't actually start having symptoms until I was 18. Most people with schizophrenia don't develop it until later in life. So even though I had a mom with schizoaffective disorder and I had the genetics for the illness, I didn't have my first symptoms until I went off to college. So I knew what schizophrenia looked like because I was a caregiver for my mom. She started having symptoms when I was, in middle school, and through middle school and high school, I kind of watched her suffer. And back then, we didn't have any answers. We didn't really know who to go to. It took a long time to get her properly diagnosed. So it wasn't until I went off to college that I started having symptoms. And even though I knew a lot about schizophrenia because of my mom, uh, the disorder is because of the delusional base of the disorder. I couldn't figure out that that's what was going on with me, and so it took me a few years actually to reach out and get the help I needed. I tried to self medicate using drugs, and that's what led to my addiction and my eventual incarceration. And so, even though, like I said, I had been around schizophrenia before, uh, I wasn't able to identify that that's what was going on because I was delusional, I was hallucinating, and I wasn't in the right state of mind to be able to figure that out.
Can you give us an idea of what these delusions and hallucinations might look like? Can you share some examples of how they've manifested themselves with you?
Yeah, so my auditory and visual hallucinations, for me, tend to be mostly what you would experience is just regular people. And so when I'm having auditory hallucinations, I'm hearing voices. Auditory hallucinations can manifest as different sounds and noises for people. For me, it's usually just voices that I'm hearing, and that can be one voice to several voices. I always try to explain it to people. It's not like an internal thought I'm having. It's not like an internal monologue. It's something I'm actually hearing. And so whether it's someone sitting next to me or down the hall, like it's registering to my brain as actual noise. And for visual hallucinations, it's the same thing. I'll see someone who isn't actually there, and it's so real to me in the moment. The only way I can describe it to people is that if I'm sitting in the room with three people and one of them are a hallucination, I won't be able to tell the difference. That's how real it is to me. My hallucinations have changed over time. Before I was medicated, when I was still on drugs, my hallucinations were a lot darker. I would see things like faceless people. And back then, though, they were that real to me because the level of delusion that came with it, I thought that they were really there. I thought that's what I was really seeing and hearing. The delusions themselves were, for anyone who doesn't know, delusions are basically a way of thinking that like is incorrect. So I would literally have thoughts that either my wife was trying to poison me or that I was in a coma and everything happening around me was just a dream I was having while in a coma. And so I was experiencing these things that felt very real to me. This is, the same thing when we hear people with schizophrenia saying they're being followed, and they can see, agents or cops or, whoever trying to lock them up. I would have a lot of these different delusions as well. And, you could provide me with all the evidence and you could show me the facts of like why it's not true. But in that state of mind, you couldn't have convinced me that that wasn't happening, because in my mind, that's what I was experiencing.
Yeah, I think lazily you could probably think, whether it's auditory or visual, as you were saying there, it's just words in your head. You can just stop hearing them, or if you're seeing something, it's not really there, you can sort of rationalize yourself out of it. But I think you did a lovely job there of really painting the picture of it is actually happening to you as far as you're
Yeah.
concerned. I think that image of the three people in the room, and if one of them was a hallucination, you wouldn't be able to pick out which one is really powerful. What are some of the common misconceptions around schizophrenia? So we maybe touched on a bit there around the hallucinations, and you can just rationalize your way out of it. What are some of the other misconceptions that you hear around this condition?
I think one of the most common is people still confuse schizophrenia with DID, or what used to be known as multiple personality disorder. So, multiple personality disorder is now diagnosed as dissociative identity disorder, and it's referring to having multiple alters inside of a single person. People still sometimes think that's what schizophrenia is, and it's a little confusing because the original name for schizophrenia, it's based off of split mind. So people get a little confused with the two disorders, and they sometimes think that they're the same thing, and they're very, very different. um, Another thing that I hear a lot is there's still a huge misconception that people with schizophrenia are inherently dangerous. And there's a lot of reasons for this. There has been people who have committed, terrible acts because of delusions or hallucinations. And when the media portrays like that's why people have done horrible things, then there's this idea that everyone with this disorder is violent or could be violent, and the statistics don't really show that. Um, anyone in the world could do something horrible and be in a state of mind where they harm themselves or others. And so schizophrenia doesn't make a person inherently violent. And I think that's still a huge misconception. The last thing, and one of the biggest misconceptions I think that we overlook, is the misconception that people with schizophrenia can't live a full and functional life. When I was diagnosed, I didn't think that that was possible, because the only representation I had ever seen of schizophrenia was TV shows and movies, which portray people as schizophrenia as either psychotic or unable to live outside of a psychiatric facility. And so it wasn't until I was diagnosed that I started meeting advocates who are, they live with this illness, they work, they go to school, they have a family, and I didn't know that you could do that with schizophrenia. And so I think that's the biggest misconception I fight against, is trying to educate people that, with the right care and the right access to help and medication, that you can live a pretty happy and functional life.
I think going back to that second point around people with schizophrenia are automatically dangerous, and when we see things in the media that have happened, it feels like almost a convenient truth for people. It's a way of maybe making it a way of them rationalizing in their head why something's happened. Oh, they've got schizophrenia, so it's an easy out, I suppose, rather than kind of like
Yeah.
really going into the weeds of what's happened.
Yeah, I think people, I think it gives them, like you said, a reason. I think it makes them feel like they can blame it on something, because it's scary to hear someone, do something horrible or commit a violent act, or do something that, like, in your rational brain you're like, why would someone do this? But always pointing the finger at mental illness doesn't do justice to why people are doing terrible things. And largely it goes to, if it is a mental health or mental illness issue, we need to be addressing and getting people the help they need. But the same people who blame mental illness for violent acts don't seem to want to help fund mental health care or fund mental illness research. And so my biggest thing is just making sure that individuals with the illness can really share their voice and show, like, hey, there are plenty of us out here living regular lives. I've never committed a violent act. I've never hurt anyone, and I think that's really something people don't get to see a lot. The only time they see someone with schizophrenia in the news is when they have done something horrible, and those stories blow up and we see them all over. And we also have the issue of, and I know people love it. I get hooked on it too. Serial killer documentaries and stuff like that. They'll always want to talk about the most insane acts that people have committed because of an illness like schizophrenia, and it's just like, it's not a majority of people that are committing terrible acts, but there are people out there who have done really bad things with this illness, and we tend to put a spotlight on those and make it seem like that's the only way people survive with this illness, is by committing some sort of violent act or terrible act, and trying to point a light at people who are living full and functional lives, I think, is way more productive.
How did schizophrenia impact how you saw yourself, particularly when you were growing up?
Uh, you know, Most of my journey with mental health early on was through the lens of my mom. So I didn't feel like that personal of a connection to it. I felt more like disappointed for her early on, during high school and stuff, because at that point I was pretty high functioning. I struggled at school and stuff because I was a caretaker for her. But at the end of the day, it wasn't my own personal experience, so I didn't really understand how that looked from her point of view. All I saw were people treating her differently because of this diagnosis. When I was like first experiencing symptoms, I think it very quickly became apparent to me, uh, how inconvenient my illness was for others, and how much of an inconvenience that made me to others. I lost a lot of friends when my symptoms started. Family members stopped reaching out because they were afraid of me, instead of trying to ask for help, or trying to get me to seek help. And so what shocked me right away was just the amount of people that didn't care enough to see me recover. That I had a few close people, obviously my mom, my wife, a few friends, but there was a lot of people who just did not want to be involved with me, my illness, and my recovery. So I think a big part of what I experienced in my own personal journey was just a lack of support, and a lack of interest in people that I expected to care, like people in my community, people in my family, friends that I had had for years suddenly weren't there when I needed them.
And as you were saying there, you felt like an inconvenience and almost a danger then, and then that was time back to how you saw yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
How's your journey with schizophrenia maybe challenged or reshaped traditional ideas you had around strength and resilience, and how that can maybe show up in different forms and different ways to how we might normally think about those traits?
I think my understanding of schizophrenia, like I'm very grateful for my own journey, and I found a lot of strength in my own journey. I think what really builds my idea around like the resiliency people have is through other people's stories, though. I have met some incredible schizophrenia advocates who I've been through a lot. I'm not trying to downplay my own journey, but I'm just one story of schizophrenia. There are so many amazing advocates out there who have been through just the most terrible things, and they've come out on the other side, and they've been able to use these really horrible stories of addiction and incarceration and all of these things they had been through to try to help people better understand the illness, but also to try to help others who are struggling get through. And so I've been able to work with a lot of amazing people who have gone above and beyond the expectations of what someone with schizophrenia is capable of doing. I work with a really great advocate called his name is Carlos Larari. He is a schizophrenia advocate who when he got his medication and treatment, he actually went back to school to become a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and he after that went back to school to get to pass the bar and get a law degree. So it's like no one thinks that a person with schizophrenia can even live a functional day-to-day life, yet we have people with schizophrenia going above and beyond recovery just to try to make the world more livable for others who might be suffering.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. And the way that I see it is strength in this situation is about challenging the norms and not taking what people are telling you about your condition for granted. You're rewriting the rule book, so to speak.
Yeah, and a good example of that is when I was first diagnosed, I actually had a doctor tell me that I would never work again. And it wasn't a question. Like, I got diagnosed, and a doctor basically asked me if I was on disability. I told them no. I was trying to get another job, and I wasn't doing well. I kept losing jobs because of my illness. It was hard for people to want to keep me on, because when I did have symptoms, it was very obvious that I was unwell. And a doctor told me that I should get comfortable being on, some sort of disability because I would never be able to work again. And so, little did he know, over the next 10 years of my life, I would have many different jobs. And I actually just wrote a book called Minds Over Meetings, and it's about mental health and mental illness in the workplace and all of the different industries I worked in and all the different jobs I had, despite me being told that I would never be able to hold a job. So that's just like one thing I was told, and I was told a lot of different things. I was basically told I would never be in a place where I could understand what was going on completely. I would never be able to build or maintain healthy relationships. I'd never be able to independently take care of myself or live on my own. And I do all of those things now, but no one believed that I was going to be able to because of the severity of my symptoms, because they saw a broken person who was, struggling with addiction, who was in recovery from drugs and alcohol, but who was also trying to deal with a severe mental illness. So it wasn't in their realm of thought for me to be doing as good as I'm doing now. And I think when we set really low expectations for people with illnesses like this, they don't see the motivation to try. Because, I mean, if a doctor tells you, like, you're never going to work again, it's hard not to believe them, and I almost did. I almost didn't try. I thought, like, well, this is the person I'm supposed to trust with my care, and this is the person who is supposed to know. And statistically, that they're not wrong. Most people with schizophrenia aren't able to work or hold jobs, but a lot of that is, people not having access to care, people not getting a chance to find work that is accommodating and that they're able to do. And so people believe it, and then they don't try, and it can be really frustrating to see that now as someone who's kind of on the other end, and I've been able to be successful in certain things.
Yeah, I guess those conversations could go one of two ways. Either you could take it to heart because it's a doctor telling you that, and obviously they know what they're talking about, or that could be the fuel that you need to prove them and others wrong, I suppose, in the healthiest sense. And it sounds like obviously you've gone for the latter, and that's worked out really, really well for you.
Yeah, and my only frustration with that is, I don't think everyone has the support I had. Like I had friends and family members who, when I told them that I didn't think that that doctor was right, they were, there to support me. They're like, "Yeah, if you want to try to work, go work." And even my wife who was with me before I was ever diagnosed with schizophrenia, she saw me when we first started dating. I was a very motivated person. I was a very driven person, and I lost a lot of that because of my illness. But when I started to take medication, I was feeling better. She saw that I wasn't ready to give up, and she said, "Well, worst case scenario, you try and it doesn't work. Like, and so she really motivated me to like, hey, she's like, if you want to work, work. If you want to try to, learn how to drive again and do all these, because I lost a lot of my freedom as an individual. I kind of felt like a kid because I wasn't able to take care of myself for a long time. And I had to slowly rebuild my life to a point where I could be independent and be an individual who gets to do all the things that adults do, like have a job and drive a car. And there was a period of my life where I couldn't do those things, and then I was told that I would never be able to do those things, and that can be really defeating if people don't have the support that I have. If they don't have someone in their life who's telling them like, hey, try, why not try? Worst case scenario, maybe they're right and I'm not able to hold a job, or maybe they're right and I won't be able to drive because my symptoms are too bad. But if I don't try, I'm never gonna know. So I want to be that voice for people who might not have that family support or that close friend that pushes them a little bit further. I want people to at least try.
Hi everyone, I want to take a moment to shout out Apex Everest, an incredible organisation and partner of the show who are pushing the limits of human resilience. Imagine this, climbing the equivalent of Mount Everest, but right here in the UK, by summiting the Helvellyn mountain 9 times in just 48 hours. But Apex isn't just about the challenge, it's the chance to be part of a year-round, vibrant community dedicated to unlocking your true potential. Whether you're looking to push your own limits or you're part of a team wanting to build an unshakable bond, this experience will stick with you for life. So if you're ready to conquer your Everest and be part of something special, check out apexeverest.com to find out more. So take us to the point where you decided that you wanted to become an advocate. Was there a tipping point? Was there some kind of inspiration? What was the spark for you to follow that path?
Honestly, the big thing for me was social media. I really, I started doing peer support. I think peer support was the turning point, right? Like I went to peer support and I realized that I wasn't alone and there was other people who were struggling with the same diagnosis or addiction recovery, or had been incarcerated because of their diagnosis. So I saw all these people who had very similar stories to mine, and that made me feel less alone. And that really motivated me. I was like, it inspired me to want to do more and go get a job. And I saw all these people living really functional, happy lives that I didn't think was possible. So when I saw that, it immediately inspired me. But then I started sharing my story on TikTok in about 2018. And when I started, I really didn't expect a lot because I had kind of built up this idea in my head that like where I'm from, you don't talk about mental illness, you don't talk about mental health, you deal with it, and you don't make yourself a burden to others. Like that's what I was taught. And so when I started sharing my story on social media, I didn't expect anyone to care at all. And it was shocking to me that people did care. And I started sharing about some of the symptoms I deal with and what it's like to have auditory and visual hallucinations and what it's like to, suffer from delusions. And I talked about how all of these things affected my life and changed my life. And I remember I posted my first, I call it schizophrenic story time. It's a segment I still do on social media today. And I posted my very first one in 2018 on TikTok when TikTok was just kind of starting out. It was just really blowing up. And I went to sleep with 300 followers. I posted the video and I woke up to 10,000 followers. And like overnight, I was like, hey, there's a need for this. I saw how many people messaged me and said, I feel less alone because I saw your story. Or I had people reach out and say, I understand my son or my loved one better because you shared about your schizophrenia. And so all of the sudden, I felt like I was kind of pushed into advocacy. Like I just saw that there was a lot of need for people to feel less alone, but I also got a lot of negative comments from people who didn't understand what schizophrenia was, or they needed to be more educated about it. So I decided to just be that person, and I kind of got, I don't want to say pushed into the role. I felt very called to continue educating people and sharing my story, and from there it just took off, and I kept doing social media. I got to over 1 million followers on TikTok, and then I diversified onto other platforms. And I've been really lucky that I everywhere I go, whether it's an in-person event or it's a new online platform, there are people grateful for me sharing my story, and that's unlike anything I could ever imagine. And it gives me a lot of uh, pride in sharing my story, but it also heals me a bit. It's nice to know that my story is helping individuals who are newly diagnosed maybe get help quicker, or find coping mechanisms, or find a way to live the life they never thought they'd live after this diagnosis.
You flip the switch from being a burden in your eyes to an inspiration.
Yeah, and it wasn't anything I ever planned. I just wanted to share my story, and I wanted other people to feel what I felt when I first went to peer support groups, and saw other people living happy lives with this diagnosis. And now that I do that, it's still unreal the amount of people that reach out and tell me that they finally went and talked to a doctor because they saw one of my videos, or they finally got sober because of one of my videos. And I couldn't imagine doing anything else now that I'm an advocate full time.
I think, as well as directly helping people that are suffering from it, you touched on it there, the support network, how important that was for you as well. And I can imagine that the education piece for them will be massive in terms of then helping the people in their lives that have schizophrenia as well. Because as you said, if you don't have that network, and a lot of it, as you were saying, is around understanding the condition and maybe some fear associated to it and all of that. But if you're then helping that support network to better understand what it is and how they can support people in their lives, that's going to help them and also the people with the condition too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of the people who follow me are caregivers of someone with schizophrenia, because it can feel really, and I have the really unique perspective of being a caregiver and a person living with schizophrenia, and I know how defeated it feels to watch someone you love go from the person to someone you don't recognize, because they're delusional, they're paranoid, they don't trust you, they're afraid of you. There's all of these things that it's like watching someone you love go insane, and if you don't know about schizophrenia, you don't know how to help. It's you feel very defeated. And so I know that a lot of people who follow me are caregivers. They're people who have friends or family members with schizophrenia, and I think it's so inspiring to see so many of those people wanting to learn more about the illness so that they can help other people who might be struggling, because that's really what we need, is people who are willing to speak up and be advocates for their friends and family members. Because a lot of the time when people get diagnosed with schizophrenia, they can't be an advocate for themselves right away because of the delusions, because of how intense the illness is. Sometimes they need someone to be the advocate for them until they're in a better place so that they can do it themselves. And so, we rely a lot on the caregivers in our lives to give us that first bit of help up front, even if we don't know we need it at that time.
You started to touch on your new book, Mind
Yeah.
Over Meetings. Tell us a little bit about that and what inspired you to write it.
So one of the things I found really frustrating was, like I said, after my diagnosis, I had a doctor tell me I would never work again. And I get to travel all over the country now, and I talk to patients in and outpatient facilities in every single state. And I thought when I was diagnosed that I wasn't able to work because of my symptoms. What I realized when I started getting jobs, part of the reason I couldn't hold jobs wasn't because of me and my illness. It was because employers weren't able or willing to accommodate me. Because I would be, especially after I started medication, I was usually fine for weeks on end, months on end. But eventually, I did have symptoms, and it would cause me to, either have auditory or visual hallucinations. It would cause me to have to be in a psychiatric facility for a few days. And so I lost a lot of jobs. Part of the problem was I was too afraid to disclose my illness to people, including my employers. So when symptoms came up, they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to react. They didn't know that they needed to provide me with resources because I didn't ask for help. I didn't ask for resources. And so I found out, like, through years of working and a lot of trial and error, that the most effective thing I could do in the workplace was, once I got a job, I would disclose to them my diagnosis. I would let them know what some reasonable accommodations were that they could do that would help me out a lot. And once I did that, employers were really great about trying to keep me on, trying to make sure that, I was comfortable in the workplace and that I had, additional resources, and I was able to get the help I needed and still be able to come back and have a job. So for me, I going to all these facilities and talking to all these patients, I realized that a lot of people with schizophrenia want to work, but they're too afraid to take that jump because, one, they don't want to lose out on benefits just to get fired a couple weeks later. But also, people in their lives have told them that they're not able to work. And whether that's a doctor or a social worker or a friend or family member, they don't see them in a position where they can, be a functional, person or be able to hold down a job. And so getting people into roles that they feel comfortable in is huge. But also, like, I realized early on that as a person with schizophrenia, I can't do every job, and that's okay. So I had to find jobs that could accommodate me. For instance, one of my first jobs that I had after my diagnosis was operating a forklift. I realized that might not be the safest job for someone who's actively hallucinating. So it was something where I had to acknowledge that, and I had to figure out what would be best for me. And I had a lot of success in more office-based roles. And in my last job before I started doing advocacy and speaking full time was in sales, and I did really well at that. When I wasn't having active symptoms, I love talking to people. I'm very outgoing, and so that was a very good job for me. And so I think a lot of it comes down to accommodation and making sure that people can be successful and they have the tools they need to be able to work if that's something that they're able and willing to do. And I don't think we're in a position where we can turn down people in the workforce. There's a lot of places that need workers. And I think a good thing about that is employers are having to look at pools of employees that they've never utilized before. People who are recovering addicts, people who have criminal records, people with severe mental illness. Those are hiring pools that largely get looked over, and I think people are having to dip into those for the first time ever, and they're having success. They're seeing that people can do the work. They just might need, some sort of reasonable accommodation, which is still cheaper than having to continuously hire someone for that role. So I think we're getting into a really good place in this part of the workforce and in workforce development. And so this book is really just meant to help better understand where we are still falling short and where people can really, not just find a job, but have success keeping a job and finding an industry that might be better for them.
And what are some of these accommodations that workplaces can make? I appreciate that it will vary depending on the job and the sector, but just generally speaking, what can businesses do better?
Yeah, so it's not only about the job, it's also about the individual person. So the tough thing about reasonable accommodations is it's really going to be an individual thing. Everyone's going to have something that might work better for them. And just one small example is at one point early on in my diagnosis, I got a job as a custodian. And the company policy was you're not allowed to have headphones in or listen to music or anything. And they allowed me to have an accommodation where I could listen to music because if I'm listening to auditory noise, whether it's a podcast or music, it keeps my brain busy and it keeps me from having as many auditory hallucinations. Because if it was really quiet, I would start to hear things, or if I heard a noise and I wasn't sure what it was, all of the sudden my brain spirals, and I literally like put myself in a situation where I'm increasing the chances that I have symptoms. So all they did was allow me to listen to music even though it was against company policy, and that was something they didn't have to do, but it kept me at work more. I had to call out less. I was able to be more comfortable at work. I was able to be more confident at work, and as long as it wasn't against safety regulations. So once again, if I'm operating machinery or something like that, I got to take the headphones out. But that was just one thing that a company did to help. And there's a lot of different things after that companies did in order to really help me. And for example, my last job, I said I worked in sales. Something they did where if I felt like I was, maybe I could feel that I was starting to have symptoms, or my coworkers all knew about my diagnosis. Sometimes they would be able to tell that I was starting to have symptoms before I could, and they would let me not necessarily go home, but just take a pass on the ups. So with sales, whoever's up in the line has to go and help the next customer. They would let me go back, take a break, make sure that I was in a good place before continuing my role. And so, it was something that my other coworkers, they did have to pick up some of my slack. And so I recognized that was an accommodation that was being done for me, but it was something that, I was able to kind of bounce back a lot quicker because people knew about my diagnosis, they knew how to help me. And it's really going to depend on the person and the workplace and the type of work they're doing. But there's a lot of little things that employers can do to help individual people. And I think if you're looking at just like an overall umbrella on how people can help individuals in the workplace, I would say just provide more resources. A lot of companies now have different mental health resources like employee assistant programs. And there's a lot of stuff like that workplaces are just knowing that they need to have now. And when they invest in mental health for their employees, they do see results, and people end up needing less time off. They end up, being able to continue working a job instead of having some sort of, episode or tragedy that forces them to leave. And so I think there's a lot that companies can do just broadly that would help a lot of people. But for each individual person, they might need different accommodations.
When you look back to when you were first diagnosed, can you quite believe the journey that you've been on in terms of what you've accomplished, how many people that you've helped, and where you are today?
When I was first diagnosed, I was diagnosed at 21 years old. I didn't think I was going to make it to 25. And I don't say that to sound dark or to, try to exaggerate my situation, but I honestly didn't think I would still be here. And so to not only still be here, but these last couple years, I have traveled all over the country. I've spoken to people all over the world, and I've been, featured as a lived experience expert about the illness that ruined my life, and so and ruined my mom's life too. So it's unreal to me how much of a role schizophrenia has played in my life. But also, I never expected to be able to help others who might be struggling. So I'm always grateful for that. I never intended to be known as the schizophrenic guy on the internet. And there's days where I look back and I don't think people understand, like, I'm very grateful for the life I have, but this is not what I planned, when I was first in college, I wanted to be a teacher. I knew very clearly what I wanted to do, and life changed. All I did was roll with the punches, and I tried to make the best out of a shitty situation, and I think I did that, and that's something that I'm very grateful for, and I hope that other people are able to do in their own journeys.
I opened with this question for you, Kody, and I'm going to close on it because we've covered a lot of amazing ground today. What do you ultimately hope people that are listening today will take away from our conversation?
When I first was diagnosed with schizophrenia, I needed a voice of someone who had been through it and someone who understood what was going on about their illness and what to look forward to. And I didn't have that. So now I try to be that voice for other people. And I really hope that other people out there know that they're not alone. That's all I want as an advocate, is for people to hear my story and maybe feel less alone in their own journey. And that's not just about schizophrenia. That's about mental health. That's about mental illness. That's about being a caregiver. That's about being, a person of support for someone who's struggling. It's about being, someone who is alive and functioning with not the greatest circumstances. And that can be whatever it is in that individual's life. But I want people to be able to look at my story and feel like they can relate to it, understand it, and use it in their own journey.
Kody, thank you so much for your time today. I think for me, there's been two really powerful takeaways. I think just having a better understanding of something like schizophrenia is really good, and I've certainly taken away a lot from what you've said, and I'm sure people listening will have done the same and just have like a better understanding of what it is. But I feel like the conversation transcends just schizophrenia, as you were saying there. It's more about, just broadly speaking, with mental health, how you can beat the odds if you want, or rewrite the script in terms of what people are telling you your limitations are and what you should and shouldn't be doing. And actually, with the right support and education, you can achieve amazing things as you have. And I think that will be inspiring for a lot of people, whether they have schizophrenia or if they, whatever they're going through, whatever hardships they're going through, I think that will really help them. So it's been a real pleasure talking with you today, Kody. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.